The research vessel Stellar Inquiry maintained its cloaked orbit, hovering above what the crew had already deemed another unremarkable developing world. Commander Zixel stretched his 4 upper limbs while reviewing preliminary scans. The blue planet, designated Earth in the native tongues, seemed to follow the predictable trajectory of emerging civilizations: overconsumption of resources, political fragmentation, and the first tentative steps into their own solar system. "Anything noteworthy, Dr. Mira?" Zixel asked the ship's chief exobiologist, who was hunched over her console analyzing atmospheric samples. "Their nitrogen cycle is surprisingly stable despite industrial pollution," Dr. Mira replied, her translucent skin pulsing with light patterns that indicated puzzlement, almost as if something is deliberately maintaining equilibrium. Zixel clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Natural planetary homeostasis. We've seen it before." He turned to the navigation officer. "Schedule our departure for 3 solar rotations from now. The consortium expects our assessment of the Andromeda frontier by next cycle." The ship's observation team continued their standard protocol, deploying atmospheric probes and intercepting a flood of electromagnetic transmissions. The communications specialist, a young Prelian named Vix, sorted through the cacophony of human broadcasts with growing fascination. "Commander, there's something unusual about their entertainment transmissions," Vix noted, adjusting her auditory receptors. "They contain fictional scenarios about encountering alien species. Some depict first-contact situations with remarkable similarity to our own protocols." "Coincidence," replied Zixel, barely glancing at the holographic display showing humans in silver suits greeting creatures with exaggerated features. "Most developing species imagine cosmic neighbors once they discover their planetary insignificance." Dr. Lirith, the cultural anthropologist, joined them at the observation deck. Her species' renowned intuitive capabilities had earned her a place on numerous first-contact assessments despite her youth. "With respect, Commander, something feels different about these humans. Their philosophical discussions address concepts our own philosophers only began exploring after we achieved interstellar travel." The science officer, Tuprel, looked up from his station. "Their mathematics is peculiarly advanced for their technological level. They've formulated theories requiring computational power they haven't yet developed." Commander Zixel sighed, having heard similar observations on dozens of assessment missions. Young specialists always found fascination in primitive cultures. It was practically a rite of passage. "Document your observations for the anthropological archives. The consortium will catalog Earth as a Class 3 developing world and establish the standard non-interference protocols." Later that evening, as the crew gathered in the communal dining area, conversation inevitably turned to the humans below. A friendly wager started among the junior officers about how long it would take for humans to notice the atmospheric probes. 3 planetary rotations, wagered the meteorological specialist. "At least 30, countered the security officer. "They won't detect them at all," Zixel interjected with the confidence of experience. "Their sensor technology is centuries behind our stealth capabilities." Dr. Lirith remained silent, watching the holographic projection of Earth rotating slowly above the center of the table. A cluster of lights indicated a particularly dense population center called Tokyo. As she observed, one light suddenly moved, tracking perfectly with one of their supposedly undetectable probes. She opened her mouth to point this out, then hesitated. The light blinked twice, then returned to its original position. If she didn't know better, she might think it was acknowledging their presence. "Commander," she began carefully, "would you authorize a low-altitude observation mission? There are several architectural structures I'd like to examine more closely." Zixel waved a permissive gesture. "Just maintain protocol. 3 days, then we continue to the frontier. This world will still be developing when the consortium returns in a century or 2. None of them could have possibly imagined that within hours, everything they thought they knew about galactic history would begin to unravel, and that somewhere in a nondescript building in Tokyo, Humans were already preparing a welcome for visitors they had been expecting for a very long time. Dr. Neelix paced the confined space of his laboratory pod, his tail twitching with agitation. The dating results from Earth's ancient structures defied every established archaeological principle. He'd calibrated his equipment 7 times now, even switching to backup systems, but the results remained stubbornly consistent. Computer, cross-reference these dating patterns with the Consortium Historical Archive. He commanded, his scaled fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Cross-reference complete. The ship's AI responded. No match found for dating pattern sequence. Neelix slumped into his chair. The pyramids of Giza, Göbekli Tepe, the underwater formations near Yonaguni, all showed evidence of construction techniques that shouldn't be possible without advanced technology. More perplexing still were the trace elements found in the stones, molecular configurations that indicated deliberate engineering at the atomic level. A soft chime announced Dr. Lirith's arrival. "Any progress?" she asked, her luminous eyes taking in the chaotic display of data floating around the room. "None that makes sense," Neelix admitted. "These structures contain metallurgical composites our scientists only theorized 50 years ago. Some of the stone joints are precise to the micron, impossible without quantum-guided cutting tools." Lirith nodded, unsurprised. The linguistics team is having similar difficulties. Human language patterns show root structures that appear to be source material for at least 17 consortium communication systems. "That's absurd," Neelix scoffed. "Most consortium species evolve languages independently." "Precisely why it's so disturbing," Lirith said, activating her own data sphere. "Look at these comparative analyses. Earth's Sanskrit shares mathematical properties with the ceremonial language of the Kith, who evolved 40 light-years from here. Ancient Sumerian contains phonological patterns statistically identical to early Tari diplomatic speech." Commander Zixel entered without announcement, his normally immaculate uniform rumpled from what appeared to be a sleepless cycle. "I've just received Specialist 4's preliminary report from the surface," he said, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "She found this carved into a chamber beneath the Sphinx." A hologram he projected showed a carved relief, unmistakably depicting a Tari in ceremonial dress, standing alongside a human figure. The inscription below was in perfect classical Tory script, "Until the messenger's return." The three stood in silence until Neelix finally spoke. "Dating. Approximately 12,000 Earth years," Zixel replied quietly. "Roughly 8,000 years before our species achieved written language." On the deck below, Specialist Fora had returned from her unauthorized expedition and was showing her findings to an increasingly agitated science team. The underwater structures off Japan's coast contained chambers with atmospheres perfectly calibrated for different consortium species. Within one chamber, she'd found preserved organic material, seeds from the Tory homeworld, extinct for millennia, yet somehow perfectly preserved on Earth. "It gets stranger," Vora continued, pulling a small artifact from her collection pouch. "I found this embedded in the wall of the Great Pyramid." The object was unmistakably a data crystal of consortium design, yet predating their development of such technology by thousands of years. When inserted into the ship's reader, it displayed a single image, the stellar inquiry itself in orbit around Earth, with the current stardate. In the medical bay, the ship's physician was examining tissue samples from various Earth life forms. "Commander," she called over the communication system, "you need to see this immediately." Zixel arrived to find her staring at genetic sequences displayed across her medical screens. "Human DNA shows evidence of extraordinary stability compared to evolutionary norms," she explained. "And look at these sequences. They appear to be engineered safeguards against mutation. Are you suggesting humans were created?" Zixel asked, struggling to process the implications. "No," the physician replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm suggesting they might be the creators." As the research team gathered that evening in the ship's conference room, the weight of their discoveries hung heavy in the air. Everything they thought they knew about galactic history, about their own history, was unraveling before their eyes. "We need to contact Consortium Command," the security officer insisted. Commander Zixel shook his head. "Not yet. Not until we understand what we're dealing with." He gazed at the holographic display of Earth rotating slowly before them. "Tomorrow, we make direct contact." The catastrophic failure of the Stellar Inquiry's cloaking system could not have happened at a worse time or place. Commander Zixel watched in dismay as cascading system failures forced them down toward the snow-capped Altai Mountains of Mongolia. The ship's quantum stabilizers screamed in protest as they descended through Earth's atmosphere, no longer hidden from the planet's primitive tracking systems. "Emergency landing protocols," Zixel ordered, his voice steady despite the crisis. "Minimal environmental impact. Prepare first contact packages according to Consortium Directive 15.3. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, even as alarm indicators flashed across their stations. They had trained for emergency landings on developing worlds, though never with the unsettling suspicion that the world below might be more than it appeared. "Communications officer, prepare the standard mathematical greeting sequence," Zixel continued. "Security, ready light displays, and symbolic contact materials." The consortium had developed these protocols over centuries, gentle introductions designed not to overwhelm primitive psyches encountering advanced beings for the first time. The Stellar Inquiry settled into a high valley, its landing struts sinking into the snow. Through the viewports, they could see nothing but swirling white and the dark shadows of distant mountains. "Atmospheric composition safe for most crew species," reported the environmental officer. "Temperature suboptimal, but survivable." Zixel nodded. "Maintain emergency beacon to Consortium Outpost Proxima 3. Estimated response time." 17 standard days, Commander, came the grim reply. Before they could begin emergency repairs, the ship's external sensors detected approaching vehicles. Primitive combustion engines by the sound, growing louder by the moment. "First contact procedures," Zixel announced, his mandibles clicking with tension. "Remember your training. These humans have likely never conceived of life beyond their world." The crew assembled in the airlock chamber, adorning themselves with the bright, non-threatening ceremonial garments used for such occasions. They had done this before on other worlds. The careful choreography of lights, sounds, and simplified mathematical communications designed to establish basic trust with species encountering galactic civilization for the first time. As the outer doors slid open, revealing the snowy landscape beyond, Zixel activated the Universal Translator's speaker function. It would broadcast simple mathematical sequences, followed by basic greeting patterns derived from Earth's dominant languages. But before the sequence could begin, a small group of humans emerged from the swirling snow. 5 of them, wrapped in heavy clothing, approached calmly. No panic, no weapons, no signs of the fear or religious awe that typically accompanied first contact. Most surprising was the elderly woman who led them. Small even by human standards, her face weathered by time yet her eyes sharp with intelligence. She stopped a respectful distance from the ship, removed her gloves, and raised her hands in a gesture that xenoanthropologists immediately recognized as a universal sign of peaceful intent. Then she spoke, not in her native tongue, but in perfect, unaccented Tory speech. "We've been expecting someone," she said, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "Though I admit, we thought you might choose a more temperate landing site." The crew stood frozen, not from the cold but from shock. The translator hadn't converted her words. She had spoken Commander Zixel's native language with the precision of a diplomatic attaché. Behind Zixel, the cultural specialist, Lyrith, whispered, "Impossible. Our language has never been broadcast. There's no way they could have learned it." The woman smiled as if hearing this. "We've had time to prepare," she explained, switching effortlessly to the musical tones of Lyrith's own language. "Quite a lot of time, actually." She gestured to her companions, who stepped forward carrying cloth-wrapped bundles. With ceremonial precision, they unwrapped their offerings. ancient star charts etched into what appeared to be ceramic tablets, showing constellations from the perspective of the Tauri homeworld. Star positions that matched astronomical records from 3,000 years before the Tauri achieved spaceflight. The security officer collapsed into the snow. The xenolinguist began to hyperventilate. Commander Zixel could only stare as the elderly woman approached him directly, her eyes reflecting knowledge far beyond what should be possible. "My name is Dr. Amara Chen," she said, extending her hand in the traditional Tauri greeting gesture, a gesture never shown in any Earth broadcast. "I believe you have questions. We've prepared a place where we can talk comfortably." She glanced at the ship with a knowing smile. "And perhaps help with your repairs." The diplomatic shuttle descended through layers of Antarctic ice, guided by a sophisticated network of hidden beacons that, according to their human hosts, had maintained perfect functionality for over 15,000 years. Commander Zixel and his 5 chosen crew members watched in silence as they passed through a series of massive security doors, each bearing symbols that corresponded to different eras of Earth's history. Dr. Sanjay Mehta, the silver-haired Secretary General of the Human Historical Continuity Project, noticed their fascination with the symbols. "Each door represents a technological cycle," he explained. "We're currently in the 7th major era of human civilization." "7th," echoed Dr. Lirith, the cultural anthropologist. "Your historical records only show continuous civilization for approximately 6,000 of your years." Dr. Mehta smiled patiently. "Our public historical records, yes. What we're about to show you has been maintained by an unbroken line of custodians since before the last glacial maximum." The final door opened into a vast chamber that stretched beyond sight, illuminated by a soft blue light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Temperature-controlled display cases housed artifacts that immediately contradicted everything the aliens thought they knew about human development. "Welcome to the Continuity Vault," Dr. Mehta said with quiet pride. "One of 7 located around our planet, each preserving the knowledge and achievements of previous human technological cycles." Commander Zixel approached a nearby display containing what appeared to be a navigation console with controls designed for Tauri appendages. "This is consortium technology," he stammered. "Not exactly," replied an elderly woman who introduced herself as Director Yemoja Okafor. "This navigation system was designed by human engineers 28,000 years ago, during our 4th technological peak. The Tauri navigation systems are actually based on principles we developed." She activated a holographic display showing the development timeline. "We shared this technology with your ancestors during our last major period of galactic exploration." The aliens moved through the chamber in stunned silence, confronted with irrefutable evidence at every turn. Ancient human spacecraft designs, perfectly preserved biological specimens from across the galaxy, cultural artifacts from worlds the consortium had only recently discovered. "I don't understand," Zixel finally said. "If your species achieved this level of advancement multiple times, why retreat? Why deliberately cycle back to more primitive states?" Dr. Mehta led them to a central platform that activated at their approach. A holographic representation of the galaxy materialized, with Earth highlighted in blue and hundreds of other worlds marked in various colors. "Each time humanity reached beyond our solar system," he explained, "we observed the same pattern among developing species: rapid expansion, resource depletion, cultural homogenization, and eventual collapse. We chose a different path." Director Okafor continued the explanation. "We call it the gardener's philosophy. Instead of continuous expansion, we embrace cycles of advancement and reflection. We explore, we learn, we share knowledge with developing species, then we return home to integrate what we've learned." She gestured to a wall of preserved texts. "These contain the mathematical principles your scientists discovered 3 centuries ago. We provided the foundations through cultural exchange programs when your ancestors were still developing written language." The xenohistorian, barely able to process what she was seeing, pointed to a display showing what appeared to be human outposts throughout the galaxy. "You maintained these simultaneously." At our peak, yes, nodded Dr. Mehta. The last major expansion phase ended approximately 15,000 years ago, when changing Earth climate conditions required our full attention. We maintained remote monitoring of our seeded worlds, but recalled most personnel. Commander Zixel stood before a detailed model of his own homeworld from a period long before his species had written history. The model showed human research stations discreetly positioned to observe his ancestors' development. "You've been watching us all along," he whispered, understanding finally dawning. "We didn't discover Earth. You discovered us." Director Okafor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Not discovered, Commander. Nurtured. There's a significant difference. We are not conquerors or colonizers. We are custodians." She smiled at his confusion. "Come. There's someone who has been waiting a very long time to meet you. The current guardian of memory can explain what your arrival means for the next phase of our shared journey." Dr. Xella's laboratory aboard the repaired Stellar Inquiry had been transformed into a genetic command center. Holographic displays surrounded her, each showing comparative DNA analyses between humans and various consortium species. She had barely slept in 3 Earth days, her scaled skin dulled from exhaustion, yet she couldn't tear herself away from the implications of her findings. "Computer, run sequence comparison Alpha 7 again," she instructed, her voice hoarse. "Focus on mitochondrial markers in the Tauri genome compared to human haplogroup L3. The results materialized before her, an undeniable pattern of genetic similarities that couldn't be explained by convergent evolution. Sella slumped into her chair, the magnitude of the discovery overwhelming her scientific objectivity. The evidence was conclusive. 43 consortium species, including her own, carried distinctive genetic markers identical to those found in human DNA. The door to her lab slid open as Commander Zixel entered, accompanied by the human geneticist Dr. Elena Meki. "You requested this meeting, Dr. Xella," Zixel said. "What have you found?" Xella gestured weakly at the displays. "It's everywhere once you know what to look for. Genetic safeguards against specific radiation types, enhanced immune response pathways, even cognitive development sequences." She looked directly at Dr. Mbeki. "You didn't just study us. You helped create us." Dr. Mbeki nodded, her expression gentle. "Not create. Guide. There's an important distinction." She moved to one of the displays, enlarging a particular genetic sequence. "These modifications were introduced to your species approximately 28,000 years ago, when solar radiation in your home system increased dramatically. Without this specific immunity enhancement, the Tauri would have experienced genetic degradation, leading to extinction within 10 generations." "Why?" Zixel asked, his voice barely audible. "Why help us? Why remain hidden?" "It's time you met the Council," Dr. Mbeki replied. They'd prepared for this conversation for a very long time. 3 hours later, Commander Zixel and Dr. Xella found themselves in a circular chamber deep beneath what humans called the Himalayan mountains. 7 elderly humans, each from a different continental region, sat in a semicircle before them. Despite their apparent age, their eyes held a clarity and depth that conveyed wisdom beyond mere years. The central figure, a white-haired woman introduced as Counselor Amara, spoke first. "We call ourselves the Gardeners," she explained, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "It is a philosophy our species embraced after nearly destroying ourselves in our 3rd technological cycle. Young species tend toward expansion," continued another counselor, his dark skin lined with age. "They spread rapidly, often at the expense of balance and diversity. Our ancestors learned this lesson through devastation, entire worlds rendered uninhabitable, species extinctions, cultural homogenization." Counselor Amara activated a holographic display showing a timeline of human development, multiple peaks of extraordinary advancement followed by deliberate periods of technological reduction. "We chose cycles rather than continuous progress. We advance, we explore, we learn, then we return to simpler states to integrate wisdom before advancing again." Dr. Xella studied the display with scientific precision. These phases correlate perfectly with the emergence of specific technologies across the consortium. You've been seeding advancement. Guiding is a better term, replied Amara. We introduce concepts when species are ready, then watch them develop in their own unique ways. She smiled at Zixel's obvious distress. Commander, we understand this is difficult to accept. Your culture values independence and self-determination. You've manipulated our entire history, Zixel said, mandibles clicking with agitation. No, Amara corrected gently. We've nurtured. Parents don't manipulate children by teaching them to walk, or by catching them when they fall. Her eyes seemed to look beyond the present moment. Evolution takes time, Commander. Wisdom takes even longer. She showed them records of previous human expansions across the stars, each followed by voluntary retreats back to Earth. We seed worlds, we nurture, we guide when necessary, and we watch. Children rarely appreciate parents hovering over their shoulders. Sometimes love means stepping back and letting them believe they did it all themselves. Zixel stared at the genetic evidence of human intervention throughout galactic history, struggling to reconcile his pride in consortium achievements with the humbling reality that they had never truly been alone. Why reveal yourselves now, after all this time? Amara's expression grew solemn. Because the garden is about to face its greatest test, and this time, we will need to tend it together. The consortium Central Assembly had devolved into chaos. Representatives from 87 member species shouted over one another, their universal translators struggling to keep pace with the emotional outbursts. On the central display, the preliminary report from Commander Zixel's mission to Earth played on a continuous loop, irrefutable evidence that humans were not primitive newcomers, but ancient guardians who had shaped galactic development for hundreds of millennia. Religious leaders proclaimed the fulfillment of prophecies about the ancestors. Academic institutions split between factions embracing the evidence and those desperately clinging to established historical narratives. Most concerning was the response from the Vorian delegation, who had abruptly withdrawn from the assembly after the initial presentation. High Admiral Kresh of the Vorian Command stood before his war council, his crimson scales bristling with barely contained emotion. These revelations cannot be permitted to destabilize the consortium, he declared. The Vorian people have built our identity on being the natural leaders of our galactic community. The psychological impact of discovering we may be essentially an engineered species is already causing widespread distress. The evidence appears conclusive, Admiral, his chief scientist responded cautiously. The human genetic markers in our genome can be explained through other means, Kresh interrupted. Perhaps ancient Vorians visited Earth and influenced human development. Perhaps these humans are engaging in an elaborate deception. His eyes narrowed. Either way, this situation requires a decisive response to maintain stability. 3 systems away, Commander Zixel received the encoded transmission from a Vorian lieutenant he'd once served alongside. He read it with growing alarm, then immediately requested an emergency meeting with Earth's Council of Elders. The Vorian High Command has issued what amounts to an ultimatum, he explained to the assembled human leaders. They demand proof that humans are not a threat to consortium autonomy, or it will take preemptive measures to ensure the continued independence of all consortium species. Zixel expected alarm, or at least concern, from the humans. Instead, Counselor Amara received his warning with something like gentle recognition. Your warning was foretold, Zixel, she said, her eyes reflecting a depth of emotion that startled him. The messenger who returns, it's a role that appears in our oldest prophecies. You knew this would happen, he asked, mandibles clicking in confusion. Not the specifics, clarified Director Okafor, but the pattern. Each time a garden species discovers its origins, there is a period of existential crisis. The Vorians are simply responding more dramatically than most. Dr. Mehta activated a holographic display showing detailed tracking of Vorian fleet movements. We've been monitoring their military deployments since before they achieved spaceflight, he explained. Their current mobilization pattern suggests they're assembling a battle fleet at the edge of the Arcturus system. Zixel stared at the display in disbelief. "You've been watching them the entire time." "Of course," replied Counselor Chen with a gentle smile. "A gardener never truly abandons the garden, Commander. We've maintained observation outposts throughout the galaxy for hundreds of thousands of years." Zixel suddenly understood that he hadn't delivered a warning. He had fulfilled his part in a drama scripted millennia before his birth. The humans had anticipated this moment, perhaps even guided events toward it with subtle interventions throughout his life. "What happens now?" he asked, torn between his loyalty to the consortium and his growing respect for humanity's ancient wisdom. Counselor Amara stood, her small frame somehow commanding the attention of everyone present. "Now we extend an invitation. The Vorians believe they must choose between pride and truth, between independence and acknowledgement of their heritage. Our task is to show them there is no contradiction." She turned to Dr. Mehta. "Activate the dormant network. It's time for the children to see what their parents have preserved for them." Zixel watched as commands were sent to facilities scattered across the galaxy. Hidden outposts, monitoring stations, and research centers that had silently watched over developing worlds for millennia. What exactly are these facilities? Amara's smile held both wisdom and anticipation. "Gifts, Commander. Carefully prepared gifts for a moment just like this one." The Vorian battle fleet assembled at the edge of the Sol system, a gathering of military might unprecedented in consortium history. 117 warships arranged in perfect formation, their energy signatures blazing against the void like artificial stars. The message was clear: submit to inspection and control, or face the consequences. Aboard the flagship Inevitable Ascendancy, Admiral Kresh addressed his commanders. "We approach this situation not as aggressors, but as protectors of consortium independence," he declared. "If these humans have indeed manipulated our evolutionary paths, we must establish safeguards against further interference. We are not children to be guided by self-appointed guardians." His words were interrupted by an urgent communication from the Vorian homeworld. The Admiral's scales paled as he received the transmission. Across his planet, in locations previously thought to be natural formations, massive structures were shedding their camouflage, revealing complex facilities of clearly human design. Similar reports flooded in from across consortium space. On hundreds of worlds, monitoring stations dormant for thousands of years hummed to life. Ancient ruins transformed into gleaming complexes. Underwater facilities rose from ocean depths. What had seemed like natural landmarks revealed themselves as sophisticated observation posts that had silently watched over developing civilizations for millennia. Most astonishing was the discovery on the Vorian homeworld itself. A mountain range long considered sacred in Vorian tradition had reconfigured to reveal an immense biodiversity preserve, a perfect garden containing specimens of every Vorian plant and animal species, including hundreds thought extinct for thousands of years. "Admiral," his science officer reported, voice trembling, "initial analysis confirms these specimens are genetically pure. The facility appears to have preserved our planet's complete ecological record since before the Great Dying." The Great Dying, a catastrophic extinction event that had nearly wiped out all life on the Vorian homeworld 12,000 years ago, an event their species had somehow survived against all biological probability. As the Vorian fleet maintained its threatening position near Earth, a simple message was broadcast from the human homeworld, not a surrender or a defense, but an invitation, a gathering of all species at the legendary cradle of humanity. The message bore the digital signatures of every consortium member government, including, mysteriously, the Vorian High Council itself. Commander Zixel, now serving as liaison between Earth and the consortium, witnessed the preparations for this unprecedented summit. In a breathtaking amphitheater constructed within hours by technology that seemed to manipulate matter at the quantum level, humans prepared to activate what they called the Great Archive, a comprehensive record of every species' development. Why preservation? Zixel asked Counselor Amara as they watched the preparations. Of all the paths your species could have chosen across hundreds of thousands of years, why focus on preserving other worlds' biodiversity? Amara's eyes reflected wisdom accumulated across generations of guardianship. In our third technological cycle, approximately 97,000 years ago, humanity expanded rapidly across 57 star systems. We consumed resources, transformed environments to suit our needs, and inadvertently caused 18 extinction-level events on developing worlds. She gestured toward the gathering delegates. The weight of that knowledge broke something in our collective consciousness. When we retreated to Earth to reflect, our greatest minds converged on a new understanding. The universe's true value lies not in conquest or colonization, but in the miraculous diversity of its evolutionary paths. Admiral Kresh himself stood speechless before holographic evidence that humans had saved the Vorians from extinction during the Great Dying, preserving their genetic legacy while carefully guiding their development without conquest or subjugation. The data showed human scientists working tirelessly to engineer environmental adaptations that allowed Vorian ancestors to survive their planet's catastrophic climate shift. We could have ruled, the Earth Council stated simply as the evidence unfolded before the assembled representatives. We chose instead to nurture. We could have conquered. We chose to preserve. We could have dominated, but we learned long ago that gardens require patience, not control. As the final preparations completed, a whisper passed through the amphitheater. The guardian of memory was arriving. The oldest living human, whose existence had been kept secret even from most of Earth's population. The being who would explain why, after hundreds of thousands of years of patient observation, humanity had decided that now was the time to reveal themselves to their galactic garden. The summit on Earth transformed galactic politics overnight. The Vorian fleet, originally positioned for attack, reformed into an honor guard for the historic signing of the Gardeners' Compact. Admiral Kresh, his crimson scales now adorned with the ceremonial markings of a truth-seeker, stood alongside Commander Zixel as representatives from all consortium species gathered in the great amphitheater. Humans formally joined the consortium not as newcomers but as founding advisors. Their technologies, developed over countless millennia, were offered openly, not weapons, but tools for healing planetary damage, extending lifespans, and preserving biological diversity across the stars. At the center of it all stood the guardian of memory, a woman whose actual age remained a mystery even to most humans. Some whispered she had lived through 3 complete technological cycles, her lifespan extended by methods known only to the inner circle of Earth's council. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight of experience that silenced even the most skeptical delegates. "We have watched and waited," she told the assembled representatives. "We have seen civilizations rise and fall. We have witnessed species extinguish themselves through ambition untethered from wisdom. And we have learned that the greatest achievement is not conquest, but continuity." She gestured toward a group of human children entering the amphitheater, each carrying seedlings from different worlds. "These young ones will outlive everyone in this gathering. They are being trained as the next generation of gardeners, not rulers, but caretakers of our shared cosmic heritage." Commander Zixel, once so certain of his species' superiority, now knelt before the Earth Council to become the first non-human accepted into the Custodian Academy. "I thought we were coming to study you," he admitted to his human mentor as they watched the proceedings. "Instead, you've been studying us since before we walked upright." The human smiled, placing a weathered hand on his shoulder. "That's the first lesson of true wisdom, my friend, recognizing how much you have yet to learn." Throughout the following months, joint scientific teams uncovered the full extent of humanity's silent influence. Archaeological expeditions revealed ancient human outposts on nearly every consortium world. Historical records were re-examined, revealing patterns of intervention during crisis points in various species development. Subtle guidance that had prevented extinction events, environmental collapse, or technological disasters. Most profound was the revelation that humans had deliberately shared their knowledge in ways that allowed each species to believe they had made discoveries independently. True growth requires the confidence that comes from self-achievement, explained Dr. Mehta to a gathering of consortium scientists. We provided foundations and occasional course corrections, but the journey has been your own. On the final day of the summit, the newly formed Galactic Council announced the commissioning of the consortium's new flagship, the Gardener's Hand, jointly crewed by humans and representatives from every member species. The massive vessel incorporated technologies from 7 distinct human technological cycles, merged seamlessly with the best innovations from across the consortium. As Admiral Kresh and Commander Zixel stood on the observation deck, watching the ship's final preparations, the Admiral broke his contemplative silence. How do we move forward knowing what we now know? How does one reconcile pride in achievement with the knowledge that we were guided? The same way a child eventually comes to terms with the guidance of a parent, replied Counselor Amara, joining them unexpectedly. By recognizing that guidance does not diminish accomplishment, it enables it. The massive vessel prepared for departure toward uncharted regions beyond the consortium's known territories. Its mission was not conquest or even ordinary exploration, but understanding and preservation, a continuation of humanity's ancient work on a scale never before attempted. As the Gardener's Hand engaged its quantum drive, Earth transmitted an ancient blessing that resonated with profound meaning across all consortium worlds. The universe blooms not for those who pluck its flowers, but for those who nurture its seeds. Earth, once dismissed as an unremarkable developing world, assumed its place as the living heart of galactic civilization, where intelligence first reached for the stars, but learned the wisdom of keeping roots firmly in the soil, and where the future of countless species had been patiently tended by gardeners whose greatest achievement was not domination, but preservation of the magnificent diversity of cosmic life.